Okay, hello everybody. This is the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting. Today is the 16th of June 2020. I'm going to share the agenda document in chat. Please add your agenda items and your names to the list of participants. Let me share my screen as well. Okay. So the first item I added this. This is by the packet folks. We're basically planning to transition the Cluster API provider packet to become a SIG Cluster Lifecycle subproject, and for that we are also transferring the repository. Do we have John Wook on the call?
Yes, hello everyone.
Yeah, hello. I saw the issue that you have for the repo migration itself. It's here. I guess you have to comply with the items that were mentioned by Nikita here.
Yeah, the work is ongoing. I got to almost all the issues that she raised, and yeah, I mean, I was just happy to show up here and present like the why we are doing that, at least because I spoke with that in the Cluster API, but it was clear that this is the right place that the conversation should happen. If I don't know if there is the issue is there. So if you have anything to add, just I will do it there. I will try to address all the questions. But in the last couple of weeks, we revamped our V1 Alpha V1 implementation, and now it's fully compliant with the Alpha V3. And as a company, we are kind of happy to be where the communities are that we support are. So that's why we decided to submit migration.
Okay, thank you for that. Also, the Cluster API, my understanding is that you are getting the support from the Cluster API maintainers. They are happy with this transition?
What I can tell, yes, but if somebody's here, just...
Okay, so if you got agreement by the Cluster API, the responsibility of the SIG chairs at this point is to just approve this ticket. I'm going to add my LGTM. After that, I guess you also have to comply with Nikita's demands. And something else that we have to do as well is we have to send a separate PR, which I added here as a note. The PR has to be for this repository, and the TLDR of this big YAML file is that we enumerate the list of subprojects for SIG Cluster Lifecycle. The Cluster API, existing Cluster API providers are already in this list. For instance, you have API provider IBM Cloud, OpenStack. You just have to add a new entry here with your name of the provider and where is the link to the owner file, and that's it.
Yeah, I think I opened up a pull request with that already. I will link that in the agenda.
Yeah, if you show it the link now, I can send it LGTM.
Yes, just.
Okay, so it has to be Cluster API dash provider packet.
Okay, we'll update that.
Actually, we have provider IBM Cloud. I think you might have added this under SIG Cloud Provider instead of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. Yeah, so basically, yeah, this is under Cloud Provider. You should try to look at my example here in this link.
Okay.
Just embed this PR that you have already, and ping the same people that were pinged here.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, minus Fabiano France, because
Yeah.
it's a mistake.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
And we can LGTM after that. LGTM on this PR can happen like today. And after the transition, welcome to the Kubernetes org.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Michael, we have an agenda item.
Yes, hello. My name is Michael Gugino. I work for Red Hat on OpenShift, and I also participate in the Cluster API subproject. This is a KEP that I filed. I originally took it to the SIG node, and some time ago now, they referred me to this SIG on their meeting. I think I've documented some of that in the comments here on the KEP. But in any case, I wanted to present this here because it needs a sponsoring SIG, and consensus seems to be it should be this SIG. Brief overview, there's many different actors in a particular Kubernetes cluster that can do things that disrupt a node, and there should be a central place of coordination amongst these different components, be it core Kubernetes components, cluster API components, or third-party components that exist or will be developed in the future. The core concept here is to create essentially a locking mechanism that well-behaved actors can respect. It was suggested to me by Clayton Coleman, maybe we should use a lease object because that's kind of the whole design around the lease object. So that seems somewhat sensible to me. Other alternatives could be like annotation or any other number of things that you could imagine, but primarily for every node, there will be a corresponding maintenance lease object. And if you want to do something that is going to disrupt a node, be it rebooting, stopping the kubelet, whatever that might be, you acquire this lease, and other components that may want to do a disruptive thing to a node or care about the health of a node can then check for the existence of this lease. And that basically informs them that, hey, I don't need to worry about this thing, or I can't proceed with my action because somebody else has this lease and they're doing something disruptive to this node. Another use case is preventing disruption to a node. So let's say that I'm an admin and I need to get onto the node to investigate something for some reason. I might manually create this lease or have some other higher level component that creates this lease on my behalf. And that informs other things. Hey, don't touch this node because I'm doing something. You're not allowed to disrupt it. So it's kind of like twofold. You acquire in order to do something disruptive to a node, you need to acquire this lease. Acquiring this lease doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do something disruptive. It could also just mean you're preventing others from doing something disruptive. And so that's pretty much the high level of it. And I'm really looking for feedback and input. Now, one thing that's come up a number of times is there's another KEP outstanding, the node shutdown KEP. What that aims to tackle is sometimes nodes get terminated in the cloud. They want to use the cloud provider to determine that, hey, for replica sets and things like that, that this node is actually not coming back, and we can do hacky things to detach the storage or whatever it is that they're trying to do in this KEP in those certain limited use cases. Some people think there's some overlap in these ideas. I'm not really sure there is. But for starters, this thing hasn't merged. So there's that. The second thing is, this is a very limited in scope thing for nodes that are considered failed. The node maintenance lease, as the name implies, is for things that haven't failed. So while there may be some overlap semantically about the state of an actual VM or node, the reason why it's in such a state is pretty much different. So in the case of the node maintenance lease, if you're intending to stop a node in the cloud, ideally a well-behaved actor would drain and properly follow a set of steps to stop the instance properly. There's not really a need for this node shutdown kept to really do much of anything as far as applying taints or whatever. And in fact, this kept could actually also coordinate with the maintenance lease, saying, hey, I don't need to apply these taints because I see somebody else has a lease, and so therefore this disruption was expected, so I don't need to do anything. And so there's some background and my thoughts on those, and I'd love to hear any questions or feedback.
Yeah, something that by the way, I've seen both KEPs at this point, but I briefly looked at them. I know that Yasin is the author of this one. So something that I noticed immediately in your KEP is that you have owning SIG Cluster Lifecycle. I guess this is a recommendation by SIG Node. Is that correct?
Yeah, originally I was going with SIG Node because it seemed like a very node-centric problem, and they recommended to put it on SIG Cluster Lifecycle. So that's what I did.
Yeah, I would argue that this conflates with the path location of the file, because if the folder is SIG node, the owning SIG is SIG node.
Totally good feedback. Yeah, I guess I gotta update that. That's good.
But one side effect of your potential update is that all the comments are going to be gone from the PR. Because
yeah, so that's probably very unfortunate. I'm not sure what we would do about that.
So, in my personal opinion also, if this is clearly changing a lot of code in the kubelet, my understanding of this is that it's not SIG Cluster Lifecycle that is the actual owner, because the actual owner is the SIG that owns the code. This is my understanding. And I would argue with the SIG node folks that participating SIG is SIG Cluster Lifecycle and the owning SIG is SIG node, but that's my opinion.
Well, that's an interesting point. I think actually the kubelet would be totally unaware of any of this. So we don't really expect the kubelet to do much of anything. There is a question of like creating the initial namespace and creating the initial object if we want to, as this original enhancement suggests, creating a new namespace, creating a lease object that already exists. Reason for the new namespace is to have a one-to-one mapping with node names for the lease object, similar to what they do with there's this lease that nodes already have, like health check lease or a live lease or whatever they call it. So obviously we can't really reuse that namespace. And we could put it in like an existing system namespace, but then people like have RBAC concerns and stuff like that. So really on any of these points, I'm pretty flexible. If we're going to use a lease, I prefer to have the one-to-one mapping to the node name. And I see the best way of doing that is having its own dedicated namespace. But I'm really happy to oblige there. But point being is, so not really impacting the code for the kubelet, you could, I guess, make the argument wherever we create this code, wherever that code lives today, maybe that's who should own it. But I think as far as like a point of coordination and who owns the functionality, I think this potentially is a good SIG, but yeah, I'm just kind of following other people's direction at this point.
Jesse has a comment. I have more questions after that.
Yeah, I guess it follows on quite directly. Like something I think would be super valuable is to explicitly call out like what are the 1 or 2 like killer use cases that like this really addresses. Like what are the things that really go badly wrong, and that could really help us like figure out where do we need to add code, because it sounds like it will mostly be in controllers that I think are part of or related to Cluster API is going to be my guess, but I'd love to hear what those like primary use cases are, as it were. I'm sure we'll find more.
Absolutely. Well, speaking as far as OpenShift, our primary use case that I can tell you exists today is we have another component that handles upgrades called the machine config operator. So it handles like on disk file manipulation and then reboots a host. And we also have another component that's upstream now in Cluster API, the machine health check. And so basically, when we reboot a host for upgrades, like on bare metal, that might take a number of minutes. We don't want the machine health check to then mark that machine for deletion because it didn't come up as fast as we had hoped. So that's one use case. Another use case is we have a lot of alerting and alarming and stuff like that that's saying, hey, I'm supposed to have like this number of replicas for this component that's running on my control plane host, and I don't have that many replicas. There's no real clear way to say, hey, it's okay, this node that this thing was running on, it's going to be coming back really soon. It's just under maintenance right now, so all these other things don't need to set off like alarms and reporting. And I added some other user stories there. One thing that we want to do, or believe we want to do in the Cluster API project, is add power state management. So this is another area where if you're running machine health checks, you don't want to delete a machine when the administrator indicated that you wanted to power this thing off for one reason or another. And so that's pretty much the initial use cases.
Yeah, thank you. Those make sense. I'm interested in wondering. So there would be a for the case where it's powered off, there would be a field or an annotation or a label set on some other object, and the controller will essentially try to hold the lease. I'm sort of, yeah. Is that right, or how do we imagine that working?
Okay, so like the in flow for powering off a machine. So our bare metal counterparts internally, they want to have what they call their maintenance operator, where they can like set some kind of scheduled job. I'm not really sure on the underlying implementation details, but they basically want to shut down the node at a given day and time. And to do that, they could acquire the node maintenance lease, at some time prior to that window. That node maintenance lease is an object. There's one per node. If nobody else currently has that lease, then they're able to acquire it. Once they've acquired that node, then they know they have the ability to then interact with the machine API to power off the instance. Why they might want to do this is they need to replace like a failed stick of RAM or hard drive or whatever other reason you need to turn off a bare metal machine from time to time. So in that case, there would be a higher level component that knows about the lease and is in turn shutting off the machine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I'm just like thinking through what happens if like that process crashes, because it will lose its lease, and what goes wrong at that point. But yeah, it makes sense. I'm seeing how you're getting sort of bounced around the various like you should be a CRD, you should be a lease. Like it really, I think so my feedback would be putting in some of these use cases and drawing them out or sketching them out a little bit would really help people see why it isn't the same as the node shutdown cap, I think, the other cap, and then like why it should be a lease or CRD or field or something. But I think it's a something we should try to support. And I think it'd be good to get it into core so it doesn't get removed or deprecated. But it is going to be harder, and I don't know what the right tactic is in terms of whether we should try to build it externally and then get it into core, or we should get it into core and then build it elsewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, my thinking was like this seems to be an obvious feature gap. There's going to be any number of things that want to do things to nodes, and I'm sure other people are solving this in other ways. And this is trying to get ahead of me creating an implementation, because I could do this in annotations. I could already be done, right, with whatever stuff we're doing internally. But, you know, getting everybody to align on the same thing means we don't have to continually patch each other's software to work with whatever implementation we're using. What's nice about this is it's totally optional. Like, if your component doesn't know about leases and doesn't care, then it doesn't have to use them. And it can if it wants to. So as far as like CRDs, I'm thinking not really the best case, because then something that was kind of tackled earlier in exploring this idea was, oh, well, what if we do this as like an add-on? So then if everybody wants to use this now, we have to inject this other dependency to make sure this add-on is there. And that seems kind of messy when there's already a core object type that seems very suited to this exact purpose. So, yeah, I mean, if it was truly up to me, I would just make this an annotation. We could just document it, use this annotation, and we could all move on with our lives. But people really don't like annotations for some reason.
Yeah, the reason why I suggested this, where I was thinking about CRD, was just around the failure semantics of like what happens when you lose your lease and what goes wrong. But it is like a best effort coordination thing. So maybe it doesn't much matter. But yeah, sorry, I don't want to dominate. Lubomir, did you have more things you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I'm trying to consume the cap while you guys were talking. So basically, in terms of the conflation with the other cap, usually what we do is we get the SIG architecture folks to maybe even you can invite Clayton about this into a meeting. Folks should discuss. We have conflating caps. Maybe the node shutdown cap should be dropped in favor of this particular cap. I don't know what is the process of conflating caps in general, but if you are convinced that this cap is something that should merge first, and the other folks or the other cap should consider your change first, then SIG node and SIG Cluster Lifecycle can really make this decision with respect to core. So there has to be some sort of a discussion forum about the conflation part.
I think that's a great feedback. I think I don't necessarily think that this cap really overrides or supersedes the node shutdown cap. I think they're actually just two completely separate concerns, and it would be just an additive enhancement to the node shutdown cap to potentially respect this lease. I think that's pretty minor detail if like theirs merged before ours. I guess my feedback was, can some other people look at it and kind of really digest, are these two things needing to be conflated? I don't think they really are. They're really kind of two separate problem areas. I'm not necessarily against the node shutdown cap. But as far as like taking it to SIG architecture, I think that's a good idea. I guess what would be helpful is if I had some extra buy-in potentially from people in this SIG, if this is going to be the owning SIG, to say at least the skeleton of the idea is good and we want to move forward in some form. I said I'm not necessarily tied to any one particular implementation detail. It's just, you know, you got to put a KEP together and then debate it kind of thing. So so that's, I guess, what I'm looking for. And then, yeah, I definitely think we should involve Clayton or whoever else cares to be involved in the higher level discussion.
So if we, like I mentioned in the beginning, we should have this in under SIG Cluster Lifecycle. If we are the proposed owning SIG, like I said, it's going to break all the comments. Also, if it's under the SIG Cluster Lifecycle folder, I guess this should go under generic. We now have something that is called, sorry, this is older. So we have this SIG Cluster Lifecycle generic folder that is not targeting a specific subproject. So it should live in here, potentially. Yeah, but you know, just moving directories is breaking people that link to the KEPs. Yeah, it's you know, Team Hockey has been complaining to this all the time. Like we break stuff. So
I mean, it seems to me we could do a follow-on PR after this merges to just move the file. You know, like, is it that big of it? If we want to keep the comments that exist now, and then just move the file later.
yeah, this.
I mean, up to somebody else. I really don't have a preference.
Yeah, this is going to work. We can move the file later. Another feedback that I had is that, well, if SIG Cluster Lifecycle is the owning SIG, my understanding is that we have to modify either the kube controller manager or the node controller for this additional namespace. Also, do you have the actual name of the namespace in the KEP?
I think I might have proposed a name in there somewhere.
It's good to have it because people like to buy shit on names. It's good to have the name in front of merging the KEP. This is again goes back to the owning SIG. If we modify the node controller or the kube controller manager to instantiate this namespace, then this is like who is the stakeholder? If it's the kube controller manager, is SIG API machinery. If it's the node controller, is SIG node. Yeah, so they are the owners of the code. It's not SIG Cluster Lifecycle that is the owner. But I guess we can start with the SIG Cluster Lifecycle ownership at the beginning.
Yeah, I will defer to your recommendation there. I think if we can get some critical mass behind the idea, then we can kind of ferret out where this document lives. I think like that's kind of in the realm of implementation detail. I think we all already know what the implementation will basically look like, but I don't see like it's definitely a gray area.
Okay, I'm going to add my comments to the KEP later. Something I also had something else that I forgot. Yeah. Okay. Justin, if you can also add your comments, I guess, if you want to. Basically, I'm a little bit worried that the name node maintenance lease can be used for other things. So I was wondering whether we should generalize it a bit more. Like, can we lock the node for something else other than maintenance?
Well, sure. You can lock it to prevent maintenance. Like you could acquire this maintenance lease to prevent maintenance from happening. So let's say you have like a really critical workload. I think I jotted this down and I meant to add it to this but let's say you have like a really critical workload that you don't want to be disrupted for any reason. Obviously, there's probably better ways to do that in Kubernetes, but this could be one way of additionally doing that. If for whatever reason you needed to do that, I need this thing to continue running and it cannot be disrupted. That would be a non-maintenance use of the maintenance lease. But it's kind of like, you're saying, I have the maintenance lease, therefore I'm the only one allowed to do maintenance or some disruptive action. So nobody else can do maintenance. But yeah, I don't care what we call it. Maintenance lease, disruption lease, do not touch lease. There's any number of good names, I think.
Yeah, okay. So understood. I think you basically should ping you can ping the SIG node folks on the PR saying that we plan to merge it in SIG node first to preserve the comments, but then we should move it to SIG Cluster Lifecycle potentially. And also I encourage you to gather feedback in the SIG architecture meeting because this is touching multiple areas of Kubernetes. So I'm sure that people there are going to have opinions on the name of the lease and also on the name of the namespace and so on, and the general idea as well. And after that, we can get back to the PR and decide what we're going to do with it. Does that sound good to you as a plan?
Well, so let me see if I got this. You want me to go to SIG Arch and figure out the naming and the namespaces and all that, and ultimately who's going to own it, and then come back and revisit the actual implementation details?
Yeah, potential ownership is also a discussion in the SIG Arch meeting. You know, the general cap I think should be discussed in the SIG Arch meeting, due to the fact that it's touching multiple aspects of Kubernetes. This is my opinion.
I also think that having more concrete use cases will really help people before we get there. And I'm sure SIG Arch or I suspect SIG Arch will ask for the same thing anyway, right? They want to better understand how we expect it to be used.
Okay, that's really good feedback too. Yeah, more concrete use cases. I'm always worried about putting things in that are too specific, but I guess I can narrow it down.
In an appendix and say you were asked to add them or something, but like that sort of thing, right? Just because if we see that they're all cluster API things, then that might help the cluster lifecycle. If we see they're all, I'm not saying they are, but like if we see they're all kubelet things, that might steer the node, right? Like that, this can help figure out what the changes are and where they will live.
Yeah, I originally thought this was a SIG node thing because it seems very node centric. Like, yes, other people will touch this thing, but it's ultimately about the node. But they played total hot potato and tossed it this way, so here I am. And that was some time ago, so I just have finally got it on my plate to bring it here. We got some more internal discussion, so. Could I say this has this semblance of something that seems like a reasonable idea to this group when I go to the SIG Arch meeting?
Yeah, I think we definitely support this idea. It's something that Kubernetes is lacking at the moment. We just need this overall like a review from SIG architecture because I think this is the right thing to do. I had something else, but I'm forgetting because too many things on my mind at the moment. But yeah, we can get back to this proposal. We support it. It just try to get feedback from them. And sorry for the bureaucracy rabbit hole, but we just need more people to look at more wider proposals.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I totally understand But yeah, I felt like I needed some kind of support of some group, and it sounds like this group is at least tentatively supportive of the idea. So then that's a little bit more helpful to go to SIG Arch with. You know, if it's just me in there, like, hey, I have this idea, then they're gonna kick me to you and all that kind of stuff. So I got to have all my bureaucratic red tape in order.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a quick comment about the user stories, because I think, you know, Mike, I think you captured kind of like the basics of the user stories in there. And I think just even what we talked about in the meeting today, I think if you just add it more as like a narrative, you know, like I guess make it read more like a story for what's going on there, that it seems like that would help a lot of people just kind of get to the root of the cause, basically, or the root of the issue.
Yeah, I think I agree. I thought the user stories are kind of already pretty clear, but I can see how maybe they're not, especially when you're trying to balance the user stories with the rest of the document. It's kind of hard to see what you're actually trying to do. But that is good feedback.
Right.
I just point out that when you explained it to us, you gave, first of all, 2 stories that are not the ones that are listed as user stories. So you,
Right, totally, yeah. Like we talked about it in more in-depth ways than what's in the document. And like all we have to do is capture what we talked about. It would be perfect for me.
Yeah, I think as much detail as possible in the KIP is always a good thing, even if you have to show code examples. You know, SIG out nowadays even includes small structures of what the certificate API is going to look in the next release. So you know, more detail is always good. We have only 20 minutes, so I guess I suggest we move to the next items. But thank you, Michael, for joining the meeting and present your KIP, and we can proceed after we get more eyes on this.
Thank you.
All right. I had a small PSA. Actually, it's not that much of a small PSA, but the Kubernetes release cycle is changing again. And if you have a sub-project, you might be affected by this again. So the TLDR is that we have a code freeze on the July the 9th, which is a bit of a change. The previous code freeze was this month. And also the release is again shifted forward in time. I believe, I don't remember what was the last date, but now the 1.19 is going to be released on August the 25th, which is like quite the delay. Actually, we have numbers here, so it's plus 2 weeks. Yeah. Any comments on this change? Okay. Any more group topics or PSAs? All right, I'm going to start with KubeADM quickly. We merged quite a few PRs this cycle, mostly stability changes. So the first batch of patches was related to failures when you are executing KubeADM join. And we also backported some of these to the support queue because we saw users, especially in the cluster API, seeing these problems in older versions of Kubernetes in KubeADM. The second change I wanted to mention is that we are deprecating customized usage in KubeADM, replacing it with raw patches. And the PR is in flight, the KEP merged. This is an alpha feature for 1.19. And finally, we have a couple of more PRs that are touching the sensitive topic of component config and how we manage core add-ons. This is kubeproxy. Kubelet is not an add-on, I guess, but it's a core component that we depend on. How we're managing the configuration for it. These are the updates I have for KubeADM. You can have a look at the linked PRs. Any questions for KubeADM? All right, Daniel, for HCD-ADM.
Yeah, we had a meeting last week and talked about getting some of the etcd manager code into the etcd-ADM repo. It's something that has been on the roadmap, like this idea of a layer above etcd-adm, the CLI, something that helps. So another like an orchestration layer that doesn't require Kubernetes, a Kubernetes control plane. So that's the small update.
Yeah, so we're basically planning to merge features from etcd Manager on top of etcd-adm.
Yeah, I think it will be it will share the etcd-adm repo, but the etcd-adm CLI should be unaffected. So it'll just be a separate component, but a shared repo. So just to make it easier to coordinate the two components.
Yeah, I'd emphasize it's the first step, right? Like we've struggled to coordinate the sort of how do we actually physically like start adopting etcd-adm, and like we figure putting them in the same repo and then saying, all right, we can move this code into a library, we can like build in etcd-adm into our image and start calling it out here, like that sort of thing will be like the second steps. So the first step is just to get them all in the same repo, and then we can actually start the convergence. And it's been a sort of barrier, I guess, to actually making a lot of progress on that, and has sort of hampered my personal ability to work on etcd-adm CLI, because I've been sort of pulled into this other project. So hopefully it will be one project.
I think this is a very good idea. Just to understand more about it, so etcd-adm is going to remain the only CLI tool in the repository?
Yes, it's yes. When we and it's going to be the one in the root directory. etcd Manager actually has a CLI, so we will when we merge the code in, it will also get that CLI tool. The CLI tool does things like listing backups, for example. The intent is that that CLI tool goes away. But so etcd-adm remains the main CLI. etcd Manager does have a CLI that will come along, but will not be. We're not going to promote it as like another CLI or anything like that.
Yeah, just a disclaimer in the README, something like that, so that this is work in progress. We're merging the projects or something like that. Is
yeah, that's a great idea.
It's going to be good. Okay, any questions for etcd-adm? All right, Cops, Justin.
Just a quick update. Like I think the most cross-project thing of interest is COPS has historically defaulted to an image that we built ourselves, and it turns out that basically everyone is using Ubuntu anyway. So we are trying to use Ubuntu as our default image, Ubuntu 20.04 specifically, which is now an LTS that has a lot more in it. I am still investigating the image builder project and still personally working on that, but like we're looking at Ubuntu 20.04 as our default in COPS and seeing sort of how that goes. There are some sorry.
What image were you using before that?
A one that we built ourselves, derived from Debian. So it's not a massive change, but we've definitely lost some things by doing this. We've gained security updates, for example, but we have lost, or more timely security updates. We've lost preloading of Docker or Containerd, for example. So the bring up is a little slower. We preloaded a bunch of other packages that Kubernetes needs or encourages, like I think contract isn't on by default, but is sort of important, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, preloading as much as possible is great, especially if we have so many end-to-end tests. They have to exercise a lot of network traffic otherwise.
Yeah, and like downloading from, at least downloading from the Docker apt repos has been flaky in the past. Like AWS has and GCE, and I'm sure other clouds have their own apt mirrors, so that tends not to be flaky and tends not to be too slow, but it is slow to unpack.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, any more comments or questions for COPS?
One question I have for COPS. I'm a new joinee here. I thought COPS is something that was pre-cluster API. Is this still being promoted and maintained, or is this something that is getting deprecated?
It is not getting deprecated. It does predate Cluster API. We are actually we want to start adopting Cluster API in COPS. There's a nice architectural diagram with like the different layers. And I think like if I were to try to paraphrase that, the idea is that we are trying to build so COPS is sort of like a user-facing tool. And we are also trying to build in SIG Cluster Lifecycle a bunch of building blocks that can be combined to make it easy to create consistent user-facing tooling. And I think actually Cluster API itself may end up producing one of those tools, which is great. And the intent is that however you assemble those tools, whether you get one that is assembled by the community, like COPS or I think it's Cluster CTL is going to be the name of the Cluster API one, whether you get one that you've assembled yourself or whether you get one that is assembled commercially for you, that the overall experience will be the same and will be a good experience. So I believe at the moment COPS is still considered more of a recommended one for people that want to like just use it. And if you want to get into Cluster API, it's a great. It's still not GA technically, and so it's a little earlier, but is like great promise, and you'll be able to consume that through COPS eventually.
Right. So does Cluster API also have its own offering of COPS-like tool on top of API?
I'm not sure. Cluster CTL. I don't know if someone can speak to that.
Okay.
I'm not super familiar with COPS, but like I don't think Cluster CTL is as mature as COPS is for doing full deployments. Like, you know, you can use Cluster CTL to initialize a cluster that could host the CAPI components, and then you could, you know, migrate things to that cluster. But I don't think it does installations the same way that COPS does. Not yet.
Cool. I think my last naive question is, how is KubeADM related to all of this?
I can, like, KubeADM is another one of those standardized building blocks that we are trying to produce, as are a bunch of the sub-projects like etcd-ADM. And if you sort of combine KubeADM, which is node initialization, etcd-ADM, which is etcd management, Cluster API, which is sort of infrastructure, I guess we'd call it, management now, and the cluster add-on sub-project, which is the sort of Kubernetes components that go onto a cluster, you can build up, I think, the full feature set of something like COPS, or the full feature set of like how you run and operate a Kubernetes cluster.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, basically,
I feel like if you deploy CAPI, that will basically be your COPS, you know, because at that point you can just make declarative clusters on whatever is running CAPI. So I mean, like it's a little bit different tool than what COPS is doing.
yeah, basically we are, for this particular SIG, we are planning to make things modular. Components should be embeddable. Higher level components like should use etcd-ADM with KubeADM. We are trying to clear the boundaries between projects as well. We had a diagram somewhere, but I cannot find it. So the overall SIG picture, we presented that at the last KubeCon, I think. But yeah, we have low level components, high level components. It's a complicated landscape. All right, Minikube.
Yeah. All right. So it's been like 3 weeks now, but we released Minikube 1.11. The main focus there, other than like general integration testability, was specifically working towards making multi-node clusters a GA feature. We're not quite there yet, but we made some good strides in the last release. And the other big thing is now that we're pushing the Docker driver as we're going to try to push the Docker driver to be like the default driver for every platform. We're not quite there yet either, but we're working towards that. We need to make sure that our base images are available to users that don't have access to GCR. So we've done that, and so there's an automatic fallback to GitHub. So that's that was what we implemented over the last month.
Yeah, thanks for this update. I had one question related to the support SKU that Minikube has. I know that Kind supports like still supports like Kubernetes 1.11 or something like that, and they get users that have an issue with 1.11, but is no longer supported. You know, core Kubernetes and kubeadm no longer support this version. And I spoke with Ben and told him like you should start dropping these old and supported versions because it's a complication for you. And I saw in the kubeadm Slack channel, one of the Minikube maintainers, I forgot his name. He was asking like about support for 1.13. So I guess my question is, what is how far back do you go with support?
We usually go n-5. So currently Kubernetes is 1.18. So we officially support 1.13 to 1.18 right now.
I see. So this forces you, to my understanding, to have some conditional logic related to.
Yeah, so dropping 1.11 and 1.12 actually got rid of a bunch of the conditional logic, but yeah, we do explicitly support versions, and then as we drop them, we drop all the conditionals and all the special YAML files that sit in our repository and stuff like that.
Yeah, especially corporate config is unavoidable if you have such a big view. Yeah, Kind also has the same conditional logic. It's something that they have to maintain, I guess.
Yeah, 1.11. We've been supporting 1.11 until recently, and it just became too much of a burden to do that, so we just dropped it.
Yeah, eventually kubeadm will stabilize having this v1 config, but it's very, very far down the road because we are mostly blocked on external factors like component config and kubelet changes and things like that. So it's not a clear road for us still.
Yeah, and we'll continue to support conditionally in the meantime. We're not too worried about it.
All right. Thanks. Questions for Minikube? All right. Mike, you have an item for autoscaler?
Yeah, this is just a really quick update. Last week, we merged a PR that allows the CAPI provider for the autoscaler to run in like separated cluster mode. So previously, you could only run the autoscaler as a joined cluster, but now we have a workflow that people can use to run autoscaling with a management cluster and several workload clusters. So it's a minor update, but I think it's pretty big for the project.
This sounds great from my very elementary understanding of the autoscaling problem for CAPI, but can you please link the PR so that folks can have a look at some of the details around the change?
Yeah, I will definitely do that.
All right, questions for this, the cluster autoscaler? All right, folks, we are done. Any final topics? We have 2 minutes left. All right, we're getting 2 minutes back. Thanks, everyone. See you in a couple of weeks.